Hey CC friends, welcome to video two, part two of the straight lines. I moved my camera shot to my front porch, hoping that the lighting would be a little better because this video I want to be able to show in the book. So I'm going over the complex for my if you're doing the fractions or the naturals. This one was very self-explanatory. It was fun for them. I encourage do all of it. Naturally, when it gets into some of the harder concepts, like you'll even see some problems that involve trigonometry. The trig functions are the sine, the cosine, the tangent. They look like sin, cos, and tan. Yeah, they don't need to fully understand that. That's just for them to see, experience, trace, get to know it a little bit. So it's kind of like when you read to your child a more advanced book, or like when we read the Bible to our children, we're not expecting at 5 or at 7 or 8 that they're going to fluently be able to read chapters upon chapters of Bible, but we still expose them to that and higher levels of literature and things like that. So just think of those more as exposure, where some of the stuff where they're able to trace the lines, plot the points, all that stuff is very doable for them, but be patient because it's a naturally very new concept for them and just walk through it with them. But if you have your student in complex, we'll go over just some of the problem sets that I would recommend really focusing on. And again, this is not to say if you're working through the book and it's going great, you're doing the 4 pages a day, that's wonderful. But if at this point you're feeling a little overwhelmed, I just wanted to kind of give some guidance from a standpoint of higher levels of math. And even at 7th grade, what would be beneficial, most beneficial for them to know and fully understand. So, starting with page 1, there is near the bottom of the page, you can see, oh, hopefully the lighting will be better. You can see rectangular coordinates. So this part here would be very good for them to just do. It teaches them how the coordinate system works. They get to plot a few, it talks about it as hops, just like we've done with the number line. How do we plot the points? Well, we're doing hops over and then hops, and then it has a couple problems, area problems, and area is a really good way, especially area of squares and rectangles, is a really good way to grasp a firm understanding of that coordinate system. Now, page 2, I would say everything on there is great. It's even some beginner geometry, so you have linear graphs and notations. Just don't be afraid to look in the answer key to fully understand what's happening. For your lines, there's just two important parts. There's the slope and the y-intercept. And from that we can graph any line. And so it's really going through the format. It's going through examples. It's talking in line relationships. The next section down about parallel and what is a parallel line. It has the same slope. There's the part that says write the slopes m and the intercepts b under the line relationships on page 2. Again, that one, don't be afraid to go to the book or the answer key and really understand it, or write it down even if you don't understand it. And it's just kind of knowledge pieces to know. It's start to memorize. Y is a slope of infinity, a vertical line is not necessarily that important to grasp, but right now it is important that they know that a slope of infinity is going to give you a vertical line, a slope of 0 is going to give you a horizontal, and then all your other slopes will be oblique, or they'll be like a slanted line. Negative slopes go down, positive slopes go up, and then it even has slopes and intercepts at the bottom where they're calculating the slopes and simplifying certain math problems that are, again, it's giving them the math practice. These are the problem sets I love the most in this, are the ones that it gives them the practice. That light is so glary. Yeah. It gives them the practice of the mathematics of multiplying, adding, those things, just so they don't get out of practice with that. But it's also illustrating, very important concepts for later on in algebra and beyond, of just being able to plug in values and calculate for functions. So then moving on to page 3, there's a little bit about functions, and functions are going to be something that they learn more in algebra. But at this stage, at 7th grade, it's great that they're already being um, introduced to that. So on page 3, the only two things that I would say are really important. I do love how they are shading regions in that very first section. But again, I'm just kind of highlighting the things that are really, really important. Those visuals are great. They're pretty simple, so you can walk them through that. Uh, and but where it's the vertical line test, the horizontal line test, it's just really simple for them to walk through those little problem sets real quick, and basic understanding, but also important concepts, to have them read what it does the vertical line test mean, what does the horizontal line test mean, even if they're not understanding what's that talking about. Just have them read it and be exposed to it, because it is how we test if something is a function or not. And later on, it'll walk the process a little bit of inverse functions, but inverse functions are very important also in algebra and pre-calculus and beyond. So we have to make sure we understand it as we're working higher levels of math. So right now, treat it like, and the exposure to it and understanding that it's actually not that hard of a concept. Then we have the vector graphs. And so I highlighted just that first section because I thought it was really cool. Now they finally get to see their vectors graphed on a 2D coordinate. And so just some good problems. Again, pretty straightforward. They're not overly challenging. I hope you can see what I see on my end, because I'm still working on the lighting situation. I promise I've never been a YouTuber, and but I just kind of wanted to share my 2 cents in the math realm, because it's been an area that I've been passionate about for a while. So we're still working on the lighting and all the fine tuning of these videos. So bear with me in the weeks to come. Hopefully it will get better and better over time. Um, then there is on page 5, 2D geometry, planar system. There's this little plot and label the points. So any of these sections with plotting and labeling the points are good for them. At 7th grade, they likely will be exposed to this even in standard curriculums at some point, not to the level that this one is, but have them plot those points, get used to that. This I'm going to show in another video because it connects to the polar system. If you get it and it's making sense, great. But I am going to go a little deeper into that later when I do my other video. And there's some more things with the complex numbers, functions of complex numbers, and they are great. This one I actually didn't highlight, but at the bottom of page 5, where it says rectangular coordinates, it really illustrates well what the slope is. It's the rise over the run, or the change in y over the change in x. When you see that little triangle, that's a delta. It's a Greek delta. It's a letter. So the change in y over change in x is your slope of your line. And so it goes over that. So that's good for them too. Then on page 6, a lot of this stuff, then after they get through the basics, again, it starts to repeat. So anything that they found was straightforward and easy to compute, have them kind of race through that. And then you could go back to all the other more challenging concepts and work through as many of those as you can. But they have slopes and intercepts. There's some things in here about midpoint, distances, absolute values, and it's right here at the bottom of page 6. So that would be a problem set. Not to necessarily sweat over, but just a good one, and fairly simple and straightforward to work through. Then page 7, I didn't really highlight anything. And I look at page 7, I think everything on there is awesome, important for later levels of math. But, there's some repeats, and we have um Probably if you were going to do one thing when it says functions linear, right in the middle of the page, would be this little section here of just plotting points and seeing how they connect to a function. But everything on that page, nothing again too challenging, but we're just highlighting. You're not overwhelmed either. And then page 8, similar. There's a lot more with vectors, but again, there's some harder concepts there that I'll be explaining in my next video, in addition to page 9 and 10. So, I'm not saying don't do page 8, 9, and 10, but I'm just saying that there are some harder concepts. There are some things in the complex plane. But remember, if they're doing great and they're enjoying plotting points, take them into that complex plane because it's the same thing. The y just is going to go up and the x is going to go over. But we'll talk about that a little bit in my other video too. And then, so that was on page 9. And then we have page 10, setting up equations of lines. I just put a note here at the bottom of page 10. This is very important for them to know in algebra of just the different formats of lines. So this would be a great thing for them to just work through. And it's again pretty straightforward. And that way it's introducing them to equations of lines and how to set them up. And then there's just a lot more repeats on page 11 and 12. 12 has an awesome illustration with, vector operations. It shows your rectangular, polar, and imaginary coordinates all kind of at once. And so this is just great for them to see how are they all connected, how are they similar, how are they different. So that's not something that they need to sweat over if it is difficult for them to understand, but it is something that's a good illustration for them. And then there's some other things on 13 and 14 that I didn't really highlight, but again, just as you're working through, your student and yourself better than I do, but a lot of it from here on out is repeats and getting into the harder and harder concepts. So there's things that I talked about first. Those would be my key areas of focus for you, of get through those first and then start picking at the heavier content. And again, my final video I'll go into a few of those heavier subjects, just showing you how the imaginary plane works, the polar plane works, and calculating distance formulas, that's in there too. And that's also important for them to understand. This last one here, slopes and intercepts on page 14 is also great to work on just for some algebra skills, but or even some arithmetic skills, but also, just to help them gain that understanding of lines, equations of lines. And finally, I'm going to probably recommend this in most cases. That very last page that I love, and it's not in the fractions or the naturals, but this last page is kind of like the mastery page. It says careful calculations. This one would be good for them to just work through all of them. And if they're stuck, that's fine. But just kind of treat it like a end of the week. We're gonna do this, see how it goes. Everything in there is pretty good. It's gonna want them to calculate the slope and the distance. And I think a few of those problem sets I highlighted really talked about the distance formula, but we will also go over that in my other videos. So the next video will be your complex plane, polar plane, and calculating distance. And I believe that was all I was going to cover in depth on it. But if you're looking at some of those computations and you're like, this is a little much for me, then stay tuned and check out the third video for this unit, straight lines. Otherwise, have a wonderful day and thank you for joining.